At 3 a.m. outside a 24-hour diner off Texas Interstate 10, a blinding beam of eerie blue light instantly vaporized the gas station across the street into a vacuum fireball. But Earl, the night shift cook, just deadpanned, flipping a strip of bacon on the griddle and wiping the ash off his face with a grease-stained apron. "Hey out there, I don't give a damn what kind of freak you are," Earl roared through the shattered glass at the 12-foot-tall hovering mech. "If you ain't ordering a double cheeseburger with hash browns, get the hell out of my trucker's way. We don't do free parking." Over at the counter, 3 long-haul rednecks quietly set down their black coffees, and one of them slowly pulled a matte black Magnum revolver from under his flannel. The alien mech's sensors shrieked with alarms, but its central processor simply couldn't compute why the heart rates of these carbon-based lifeforms, creatures without even basic energy shielding, didn't register a single flutter of fear. Earl didn't even wait for that hunk of scrap metal to raise its plasma cannon. He reached down by the counter and grabbed a 30-pound cast-iron wrench that had been sitting there for damn near 20 years. The thing was originally meant for torquing down the griddle's mounting bolts, caked in 2 decades of grease and rust, heavy enough to snap a steer's spine in half. Gripping the polished wooden handle, he vaulted over the half-collapsed counter. Shards of broken glass sliced right through the upper of his work boots, but he didn't even grunt, lunging straight at the hovering mech. That 12-foot metal monstrosity was still sluggishly rotating its torso, perfectly exposing the servo housing seam on its knee joint right above Earl's head. Earl planted his feet, dropped his weight, and brought down all 60 years of his old man brute strength, fueled by the wrench's massive momentum, in one vicious swing. With a deafening clang, the cast-iron wrench wedged dead center into the servo motor's seam. Thick, ghostly blue coolant violently spewed out, drenching Earl from head to toe. It was bone-chillingly cold and reeked of cheap antiseptic. The mech's hover stabilizers instantly let out a dying shriek as the entire chassis listed hard to one side. Its metal skeleton groaned under the structural failure, and the repulsor's blue glow flickered violently before dying out. The campers and transient drivers inside the diner erupted in screams, scrambling under the heavy oak tables. But the 3 rednecks at the counter were already pulling their Magnum triggers. Searing hot slugs ripped back to back into the mech's half-blinded optical sensors, blowing showers of blue electrical sparks all over the asphalt. Earl wiped the sticky coolant out of his eyes and had just reached for the 12-gauge shotgun holstered at his hip when the night sky over South Texas suddenly flared a blinding, sickly white. Up in low Earth orbit, the Galactic Peacekeeping Legion's EMP strike had finished charging, and the warhead was plummeting toward the surface at hypersonic speed. Inside the command bridge of the low-orbit flagship Hand of Order, the pale blue holographic tactical display flickered violently. The EMP warhead's impact warning flashed, and across the map, the grid nodes of South Texas snuffed out one after another like candles in a hurricane, instantly turning the region into a pitch-black void. Zoral tapped his armor-plated fingertips against the edge of the command console, his crystalline blue compound eyes sweeping over the battle-damaged data. The signal from that scout hover mech that had blundered into the highway diner had completely vanished half a minute ago, and every human digital base station and satellite relay was now offline. He straightened up, tilting his chin at the dead-silent staff officers behind him, his voice dripping with the Galactic Peacekeeping Legion's bone-deep arrogance. Exactly as the predictive models indicated, the primitive carbon-based civilization's resistance has been entirely neutralized. Their entire command infrastructure relies on digital networks. Without their network, they are nothing more than mobile, disorganized dust. The adjacent tech officer rapidly cross-referenced the full-spectrum feed and bowed. "Commander, the quantum tactical grid has completely locked down all digital transmissions in the sector. There is 0 human digital signal activity. Resistance paralysis is confirmed." Zoral nodded in satisfaction. To him, the loss of that hover mech was merely a negligible anomaly born of a scout's error. A primitive species could never subvert the tactical logic of the Galactic Peacekeeping Legion. He was already drafting the administrative directives for the occupied zone, completely dismissing the possibility of any further variables. 1,000 miles below on the desert surface, the EMP pulse swept across the dead straight asphalt of Interstate 10. The neon signs above that 24-hour roadside diner violently popped in a shower of sparks, and the warm incandescent bulbs inside flickered like crazy. The next second, the entire diner plunged into absolute darkness. In the pitch black, Big Daddy's thick, calloused thumb brushed the hammer of his Magnum revolver, spinning the empty cylinder. 3 spent casings clattered onto the greasy floor tiles. He shoved the cannon back into his tool belt holster. The cigar clamped in the corner of his mouth flared a dull red, and he blew out a cloud of nicotine-laced smoke that easily overpowered the nervous whimpering around them. Everybody hunkered down by the walls. Don't touch the liquor behind the bar, and keep your hands off the meat in the freezer. Anybody makes a run for it, I'll drop you myself before the aliens get a turn. Big Daddy's voice was like sandpaper grinding on sheet metal. From across the bar, Earl barked right back. Bullshit. Anybody touches my marinated ribs, I'll cave their skull in with a 30-pound skillet. Big Daddy let out a muffled chuckle, grabbed a crowbar leaning against the counter, and tossed it to the 2 coverall-wearing truckers behind him. He turned and shoulder-checked the half-shattered diner door open. The dry Texas desert wind whipped in, carrying stinging grit. I-10's asphalt gleamed under the moonlight like an endless black ribbon. Out in the parking lot, the black silhouettes of 3 Peterbilt heavy-duty rigs squatted on the tarmac like 3 waking iron beasts. He strode over to his own rig, painted in a flat matte black, and violently twisted the mechanical ignition switch. The old diesel engine choked and violently shuddered twice before erupting into a deafening roar. A plume of thick, blue-black exhaust blasted out of the stacks, vibrating the very asphalt beneath his boots. The other 2 big rigs fired up right after, the raw fury of 3 V8 diesel blocks stacking on top of each other, churning the thin clouds in the night sky. Big Daddy jammed his dust-caked cowboy hat lower on his head, planted a boot on the freezing chrome step, and yanked open the cab door with a heavily calloused hand. His eyes locked dead onto the beat-up, brass showing vintage CB radio mounted on the center console. Scraping half a pound of desert mud off his work boots on the door sill, Big Daddy slammed his weight into the cracked pleather seat. His Magnum clanked hard against the doorframe. Without looking away, his rough thumb found the power knob on that worn-out CB radio and twisted it 2 clicks, right. A violent burst of static exploded through the cab, rattling the empty coffee can on the dashboard half an inch into the air. Big Daddy's thumb rode the worn grooves of the dial, clicking it solidly into channel 19, the universal distress and bullshitting frequency for every old-school trucker on the Texas blacktop. He grabbed the mic, its rubber casing half-rotted away, keyed the transmit button, and let his raspy, 50-year smoker's voice drown out the idle rumble of the 3 Peterbilts outside. This is Big Daddy, coordinates I-10 West, mile marker 47. We got a bunch of sumbitches calling themselves the Galactic Peacekeeping Legion blowing up the grid, trying to take our turf. He spat a wad of chewing tobacco out the door crack. Listen up, boys. These alien bastards only know how to kill the power and the internet. Our old diesels don't give a damn about them. Anybody looking for a scrap, get your asses down here. The second he let off the key, the static flared, and 7 or 8 gritty voices punched through from dozens of miles across the highway grid. Rebar Jimmy here, 3 miles out. Be there in 2. Tanker Joe, fully loaded with hot oil, pulling a U-turn right now. Big Daddy grinned, flashing a chipped molar, and hung up the mic. He threw it into low gear, resting his massive hand steadily on the throttle, and looked up into the pitch-black Texas sky. The horizon was already glowing with the blinding crimson drag trails of descending drop pods. 50 fully armored infantrymen of the Galactic Peacekeeping Legion were riding a wave of hellfire, smashing straight down toward the dead straight stretch of I-10. The drop pod slammed hard onto the scorching asphalt of I-10, rattling the articular gears in Krieg's bionic knees. The hydraulic hatch slid open, and the suffocating desert heat, heavy with the stench of diesel, washed over his blue visor. Zarel's crisp orders synchronized through the quantum tactical network. All digital networks in the target zone have been eradicated. EMP has paralyzed all electronic vehicles. Cleanse the scattered remnants and establish a forward operating base. Krieg stepped out of the pod, his 12-inch thick alloy boots crushing the cracked pavement. He raised a hand and activated his full-body energy shield. A pale blue, semi-transparent dome enveloped his entire frame, a shield boasting a 98% absorption rate against energy weapons and plasma streams, the very foundation of the Legion's confidence in trampling countless barbaric worlds. 50 heavily armored infantrymen marched out of their pods in sequence, forming a flawless firing line along the highway's straight center stripe. The muzzles of their plasma rifles glowed in unison with a pale blue charging light. Krieg glanced at his holographic tactical pad. The display showed only 3 scattered heat signatures parked half a mile away in a diner parking lot. He sneered into the quantum comms. Did these primitive carbon-based life forms, stripped of their command grid and electronic transport, actually dare to resist? He raised his plasma rifle and signaled a forward advance, ordering his squad to burn these unevolved savages to ash. Krieg marched forward, crushing loose asphalt underfoot. The glare from his energy shield reflected off a faded highway sign. He looked up, just in time to see 3 massive black heavy-duty trucks sitting in the parking lot. The roar of their engines was growing deafening, their chrome bull bars gleaming coldly in the firelight of the drop pods. Inside the cab, the stubble-faced old man had his boot firmly planted on the throttle. The sole of his boot mercilessly pinned the pedal to the floor. The 16-liter diesel engine, which hadn't seen a major overhaul in 15 years, let out a windshield-shattering bellow. The 80,000-pound Peterbilt surged out onto straight shot, I-10 like a stampeding bull. The other 2 rigs flanked him, launching simultaneously, their chrome exhaust stacks blowing thick, rolling black smoke that stained the biting Texas night wind, a muddy ash blue. The speedometer needle clicked past the 80-mile-an-hour mark. The half-smoked Marlboro dropped from Big Daddy's lips onto the oil-stained floorboard, but he didn't have time to pick it up. His calloused hands put a death grip on the steering wheel, his cloudy blue eyes dead-locked on the perfectly organized line of alien targets ahead. 50 Galactic Peacekeeping Legion infantrymen stood at rigid attention, their pale blue energy shields radiating arrogant light under the truck's high beams. They were holding fully charged plasma rifles, actually waiting for these digitally severed primitive carbon organisms to drop their weapons and surrender. 80,000 pounds of pure kinetic energy, led by a chrome steel bull bar, slammed violently into the formation. The front row of alien infantry didn't even have time to pull their triggers before they and their energy shields were pulverized into a spray of blue gore. The steel battering ram cleared the formation like a cue ball breaking on a pool table, instantly erasing 12 frontline infantrymen from existence. The shields, boasting that 98% energy absorption rate, popped like wet tissue paper against 80,000 pounds of raw physical mass. The front tires mercilessly ground over the fallen armor, sending the sickening crunch of tearing metal right up the steering column, jarring Big Daddy's hands. Blue alien coolant splattered across the matte black hood, dripping off the bumper onto the burning asphalt. Big Daddy violently cranked the wheel to avoid the frantically dodging alien troops, driving his howling rig straight at Krieg, who was dead center in the formation. Meanwhile, on the quantum tactical grid of the Hand of Order flagship in low orbit, 12 red dots representing the infantry had just snuffed out in unison. A shrill, Class 1 casualty alarm pierced the steady hum of the quantum core. 12 red dots representing ground troops had blinked out simultaneously, a mere 10 seconds after the EMP wiped the sector's power grid. The red warning frames flashed at 30 frames per second, bathing the bridge in a blood-red hue. Zaral, who had just declared all carbon-based resistance cleared, gripped the command armrest so hard that the veins bulged under his synthetic blue skin. "Pull up the tactical playback." "Why didn't the energy shields intercept?" Zaral's roar made the holographic screens tremble. The tech officer pressed all three of his compound eyes to the screen, fingers shaking so badly he miskeyed 3 times. "Sir, the energy shields of all KIA infantry were at maximum charge. There were absolutely no high-energy weapon signatures detected. No lasers, no plasma." Zaral shoved the tech officer aside and slowed the playback frame rate to 1%. On the screen, 3 80,000-pound blocks of metal were barreling down a dead-straight interstate highway. No energy contrails, no digital comms signals. Their only offensive attribute was sheer, goddamn speed and mass. Primitive internal combustion vehicles? Why didn't the EMP disable them? Older model diesel engines lack electronic control units, sir. They don't even require a network to operate. Zaral's breath caught in his throat. He had spent his life worshipping the absolute superiority of the quantum tactical grid and energy shields. He had never imagined a civilization would employ such a primitive, barbaric method of attack. He stared at the largest metal heat signature on the screen, watching it crash straight toward Ground Commander Krieg's coordinates. That freezing cold oil-slicked chrome bull bar was already on top of Krieg's boots. Krieg's compound sensors had just locked onto the steel shadow wreathed in diesel smoke, but the cold chrome bull bar had already smashed into his calf armor nodes. His energy shield buzzed to life. By design, it could absorb 98% of a plasma stream. But 80,000 pounds of steel momentum had zero energy signature. Krieg was launched through the air like he'd been hit by a meteor. The massive anti-slip tires of the heavy-duty truck screeched against the rubber, completely shredding the servo structures of his lower extremities. Emergency life support protocols triggered automatically. The half-mangled armor tumbled down the slope of the highway drainage ditch, ice-cold desert sand flooding into the cracked plating. The quantum tactical network was flooded with the chaotic, high-pitched screaming of infantry. 12 combat markers instantly fell dead silent. Krieg burned his remaining processing power to recalibrate his compound eyes. Through his star-blurred vision, Big Daddy's Peterbilt was already whipping its cab around, its tires grinding over the shattered armor of the alien infantry, kicking up a trail of pale blue coolant. His core processor began spitting out frantic error codes. Commander Zaral had said that once the EMP shattered the regional grid, these primitive carbon-based organisms would immediately lose their command structure and turn into scattered sand ripe for the harvest. So how the hell was this iron box, devoid of any digital signal, driven by burning fossil fuels, able to crush energy shields and tear his squad in half? Krieg forced his compound eyes toward the night sky with his last ounce of computing power. 2 Galactic Peacekeeping Legion tactical gunships had already altered their course, dragging pale blue thruster trails behind them. Their noses dipped, main cannons already glowing red with a charge, diving straight toward the battlefield. Through the dust kicking up above the drainage ditch, he could see the darkened roadside diner. Shards of glass rained down from the shattered window frames, and the heavy thud of boots crushing broken oak echoed from the shadows. Earl's boot heels ground over the blown-up oak splinters of the bar. The cold Texas night wind poured into the gash in his boot upper made by the broken glass. He swept aside a sack of potatoes in the corner, dug his fingers into the loose floorboards, and violently tore up 3 grease-soaked pine planks. He revealed a stash head hidden for 3 years, a crate of 12-gauge rock salt shotgun shells. Head kept them to deal with wild bears trying to steal his cured beef, but today they were going to do just fine for the aliens. "Stop shivering behind the damn freezer," Earl bellowed, tossing shells to the three stranded customers huddled in the corner. "This diner is open at 3 a.m., and no invader is gonna screw with my business hours. Grab a gun and pull the damn trigger. Those green freaks' junk shields can't stop a pound of rock salt to the face." The four men had just racked their actions when they saw two Legion scouts creeping along the drainage ditch with plasma rifles raised. Their blue energy shields cast a blinding cold light in the dark. The first alien leaned halfway past the shattered window to look inside. Earl roared, "Light 'em up." Four shotguns thundered simultaneously. A maelstrom of high-density rock salt slammed violently into the energy shields. The shields, which could easily absorb 98% of plasma energy, shattered instantly like thin glass. The salt blast turned the upper halves of both aliens into Swiss cheese. They dropped into the ditch without making a single sound. Earl had just pumped a fresh shell into the chamber when a deafening low hum started echoing through the night sky. He looked down the highway to see two tactical gunships bearing down from half a mile out. Their red main cannon charging lights stained the entire straightaway of I-10 blood red. Over in the parking lot, Big Daddy's Peterbilt was revving up, vibrating the ground beneath them. Big Daddy's rough hands squeezed the beat-up CB mic, throwing a gravelly roar straight into the analog frequency band. "All you sons of bitches running I-10. Those blue-skinned bastards from the Galactic peacekeeping, whatever the hell, are tearing up our yard. Bring your rigs down to Joey's Diner and let's crush these sumbitches." Static cracked across miles of desert highway, and within 10 seconds, gritty replies roared back from every direction. "Copy that, Daddy." Hauling rebar 8 miles out, on my way. Got an empty flatbed weighing 42 tons, perfect for gutting these bastards. The night wind hurled sand against the Peterbilt's windshield. Big Daddy's diesel engine roared, making the loose gravel on the ground dance. He glared up at the two tactical gunships hovering half a mile away, their eerie red charging lights making the straightaway look like a river of blood. Suddenly, a blinding set of roof-mounted spotlights pierced the darkness off the north on-ramp. A heavy-duty Peterbilt blasted onto the highway, engine screaming. Black smoke from the old-school diesel block spewed from its stacks, tearing muddy streaks into the night sky as its tires kicked up yellow sand, scraping past the guardrails. Then came the rest stop to the east, the branch highways to the west. Dozens of blinding headlights sliced open the night, one after another. The roar of engines rolled in from all sides, vibrating Big Daddy's cab so hard that his enamel coffee mug bounced right off the dashboard and snapped in half on the floor. The three big rigs initially trailing him had widened their lateral spacing. More and more steel beasts roared onto the highway. The blinding headlights lit up the two hovering gunships so brightly they washed out their silhouettes. Big Daddy gripped the peeling steering wheel, burying the throttle another inch. His knuckles turned dead white. The idle vibration traveled up the steering column and numbed his elbows. The CB radio cracked with a barrage of raspy roll calls. Red River exit in position. Ramp 12 cut incomplete. Last heavy loader in the back, IM lined up. The final roof spotlight clicked into the formation gap. Exactly 36 Peterbilt heavy rigs fanned out into a half-mile wide steel phalanx across the dead straight desert highway. Every high beam was zeroed in on the two alien gunships dropping to low altitude to charge, illuminating their silver hulls down to the last rivet. Big Daddy bit right through his cigarette butt, jammed the stick into the highest gear, pinned the accelerator to the floor mat, and bellowed into the mic. These soft asses only know how to spit plasma, and their shields ain't worth a damn. Overdrive. Lane shift. Let's paste 'em against the rock face. 36 V8 diesel engines erupted in a synchronized, earth-shattering roar. A massive black smokescreen swallowed half the highway, tires screaming against asphalt, leaving dozens of charred skid marks in their wake. The entire steel phalanx, doing 80 miles an hour on an oblique vector, charged toward the limestone cliffside. A sheer tidal wave of nearly 300,000 tons of steel kicked up a storm of gravel, barreling down on the two gunships still waiting on their main guns to charge. The gunship on the left just managed to spit out a blue-white plasma beam. It scorched a black streak across the roof of the lead truck before the gunship got absolutely swatted by a 4-foot-thick steel shipping container wall. The energy shield didn't even emit a flicker of light. The entire hull crumpled like a cheap aluminum can, careening wildly into the cliff face and detonating into a shower of blue sparking scrap metal. The second gunship panicked and pulled up to evade, but the corner of a flanking truck's container ripped its tail fin clean off. It nosedived straight into the rock face in a massive fireball. In the command bridge of the Hand of Order flagship, the two green dots representing the gunships on the holographic map instantly exploded into blinding red X's. Alarm sirens deafened the room. Zorl froze in his command chair, his fingers gripping the armrests until they turned white. He had just opened his mouth to bark an order when his tech officer's scream hit him first. Initiate full-spectrum quantum tactical lockdown. Sever all enemy digital command links. Zorl choked down his panic, spitting out the Legion's standard combat doctrine. Once the network falls, they are nothing but loose sand. The young tech officer's fingers blurred across the quantum console. His pale blue skin slowly faded to a sickly gray, and a breathless, trembling croak escaped his throat. Sir, all digital signals in the entire sector have been completely eradicated. Interference is at maximum capacity, but the enemy's communications are still active. Zoral aggressively slid his chair up to the console, his pupils shrinking to pinpricks. Crawling across the spectrum graph was a crude, chaotic sine wave devoid of any encryption protocols, completely ignoring the gaps in the quantum jamming. What the hell is that? A primitive analog signal, sir. The locals call it radio. There are no central nodes, no hackable cores. Our quantum slicing cannot find a viable target. The blood oxygen alarm built into Zorl's armor started shrieking. Every ironclad rule of interstellar conquest stated, EMP severs the network equals total loss of resistance. Yet these carbon-based life forms were not only moving post-EMP, they apparently never relied on a digital network in the first place. He stared at the hologram showing the steel flood sweeping across the barren stretch of I-10. The black smoke from 36 vintage diesel engines had blotted out half the night sky. Chrome bull bars glared blindingly under the searchlights, slowly advancing on the drop tower array. Zorl's freezing synthetic knuckles rapped against the quantum touchscreen. A single bead of metallic-laced synthetic sweat blurred the drop tower coordinate icon. Zorl's vocal cords trembled too violently to issue a complete command. Every single pre-programmed combat logic had utterly collapsed. Bridge sirens shredded his eardrums. On the holoprojector, 36 dark green mass markers were hurtling straight down I-10 at a steady 80 miles per hour. No digital command frequency hopping, no energy weapon preheat signatures. It was just a herd of pure iron blocks, driven by internal combustion, blindly ramming toward the drop tower. The tech officer's face had gone a translucent synthetic plastic white, screaming the repetitive scan diagnostics. All targets are primitive vehicles without electronic control units. EMP cannot disable them. Quantum network severance is useless. Energy shields have a sub-0.3% absorption rate for macroscopic kinetic impacts. Zorl's 300-year-old combat doctrine crumbled to dust. He had commanded 17 interstellar subjugations, and every single adversary was disabled the moment the network went down, turning into disorganized sand. These carbon-based barbarians had actively abandoned advanced digital networking, maintained comms via primitive analog sound waves, and physically brute forced the Legion's entire tactical doctrine with raw, stupid mass. He violently slammed his palm onto the max override authorization button, shocking his own servos, and screamed an order down the encrypted comms link. Maximum charge to the drop tower main cannon. Target a 5-mile radius around the sector. Vaporize that highway and those rabid dogs right along with it. Red charging warnings instantly infested every screen on the bridge. A faint but ship-rattling energy hum resonated through the quantum link. On the hologram, the base of the silver-gray alien drop tower on the desert horizon slowly began bleeding a blinding crimson light. Big Daddy stomped his old leather boot into the cab floorboard. Outside the windshield, the blinding crimson light gathering at the base of that silver-gray alien drop tower was already baking his stubble-covered face. He snatched up the beat-up CB mic, his raspy roar ripping through the analog waves. Numbers 3, 4, and 5. Spool out your industrial winches. Lock onto that thing's main coolant pipes, the 2 silver ones as thick as old elephant legs. 3 Peterbilts hauling empty containers cranked their wheels at once. 80,000 pounds of rig fishtailed violently, parking broadside less than 20 yards from the drop tower. The heavy-duty tires dragged 10-foot-long scorched marks across the sun-baked asphalt. The diesel engines thundered like rolling thunder, shaking the desert sand beneath them. The haulers kicked open their doors and bailed out, boots slick with motor oil, spooling out heavy galvanized steel cables 3 fingers thick. They jammed the heavy hooks viciously into the flange welds of the coolant pipes, locking down every shackle with 3 solid wraps. One guy even pulled a crowbar, hammering the shackles shut so tight you couldn't slip a finger in. Big Daddy slammed his accelerator to the floorboard, his knuckles turning a dead bone white. The 3 big rig engines roared with an ear-splitting fury as they surged forward. The slack steel cables instantly snapped taut, humming and vibrating like drawn bowstrings. The silver-gray drop tower violently shuddered, showering concrete chunks from its foundation block. The over-tensioned cables let out an agonizing, ear-piercing shriek. The drop tower's main coolant pipe weld gave way, tearing open a cold, gleaming fissure. Hissing blue-white coolant spewed out through the crack. Krieg lay halfway submerged in a drainage ditch filled with diesel sludge and dead camelthorn leaves. The mangled servos in his lower half billowed smoke. His energy shield flickered weakly across his chassis. Having barely survived getting crushed under a heavy tire, and with his quantum link severed, all he could do was keep his optical sensors glued to the drop tower by the highway. 1 second, he was watching blue-white coolant hiss from the fractured pipe. The next second, 3 galvanized steel cables, thick enough to wrap around a scout mech's torso, snapped tight like steel guitar strings. The low hum vibrated down the trench walls into his sensors, shaking loose rocks onto his face. 3 80,000-pound Peterbilts slammed into reverse against the roar of their diesel blocks, tires burning 10-foot streaks of black smoke and char into the asphalt. With a colossal crang, the half-meter-thick main coolant pipe was completely ripped off the drop tower. Highly pressurized coolant immediately flooded the main cannon's charging chamber. The plasma core, running at max capacity, instantly lost thermal equilibrium. The drop tower bucked violently. The stable red charging light devolved into a chaotic strobe. The outer composite armor plates blew off along the seams one by one, blasting sparks and leaking coolant dozens of meters into the air. The shriek of structural overload tore through the desert night. Krieg's optical sensors completely lost focus. As a career officer in the Galactic Peacekeeping Legion, he had been taught from birth that primitive civilizations without digital grids were entirely defenseless. He was taught energy shields blocked all known energy attacks. How could they be dismantled so brutally by a bunch of primitive, diesel-burning iron? His cognitive logic completely broke. The ground beneath I-10 shuddered violently with the drop tower's chain reaction, but he could hear the thundering roar of yet another heavy-duty diesel engine approaching. Getting closer. It completely drowned out the shrieking metal of the splitting drop tower. Channel 19 suddenly exploded with raspy laughter. It was old Tommy running a refined fuel route. I've got 8,000 gallons of high-octane gasoline crammed in my rig. It's just enough to give these space trash bastards a proper goddamn funeral." Big Daddy looked up. Blinding roof spotlights pierced through the desert night fog. A massive tanker truck, blowing thick black diesel smoke, barreled down the straight highway. Its tires crushed abandoned plasma rifles, grinding alien armor fragments into the pavement. Old Tommy was hanging halfway out the door. Just before bailing, he jammed half a cinder block dead heavy onto the accelerator pedal, tossed himself backward, and rolled straight into the highway drainage ditch, kicking up a 10-foot cloud of dust. 36 assembled heavy-duty Peterbilts blasted their air horns in unison, shaking the very air. The boys standing by the roadside clutching shotguns hollered their lungs out, filling the highway with a thick blend of profanity and nicotine. No digital navigation, no quantum directives. Just a cinder block on a pedal and 8,000 gallons of highly combustible gasoline. The tanker truck became a ballistic iron missile, shooting straight down I-10, directly toward the drop tower's overcharged, glowing red core module. Leaking pale blue plasma coolant dripped down the cracked tower, sizzling against the tanker's chrome front bumper. The main tank violently collided with the drop tower's outer core shell. 8,000 gallons of gasoline violently breached the tank, splashing directly into the red-hot plasma core. In the command bridge of the Hand of Order, Zaral's blue bodily fluids were still churning from his earlier rage under his transparent carapace. The holographic tactical screen was instantly saturated by a blinding orange-red mushroom cloud, blossoming on the surface, followed by a deafening cascade of signal loss alarms raining down on every officer's sensors. The 50 light points representing the Legion's infantry snuffed out one after another, and finally, even the mangled ground commander Krieg's emergency beacon went dead. The fireball's shockwave leveled that entire stretch of I-10, flipping all the drop pods and melting surviving infantrymen before they could even raise a weapon. The tech officer's trembling voice cut through the alarm noise. "Commander, the quantum tactical grid has swept the full spectrum. There are absolutely zero digital command signals in the target zone. They are running all comms on low-frequency analog bands. Our infiltration routines cannot lock onto a single strike node." Zarl leaned closer to the screen. On the desert thermal imaging, 36 massive clouds of black diesel smoke fanned out. The heat signatures of 36 purely mechanical diesel engines were terrifyingly stable. The EMP strike had been absolutely useless against these iron lumps lacking electronic control units. Each one hauling dozens of tons, they were accelerating down the straight highway, their chrome bull bars reflecting a cold, hard metallic glare in the light of the fireball. His core computational unit spun out of control, spitting out a conclusion that practically crashed his sensory systems. Energy shields boasted a 98% absorption rate against plasma and lasers, but against an 80,000-pound, 80-mile-an-hour macroscopic low-speed kinetic impact. The shield system wouldn't even trigger an intercept. In the entire database of interstellar warfare, an attack pattern this absurdly primitive had never existed. Zarl's transparent carapace quivered uncontrollably with sheer panic. He slowly raised his longest right appendage, hovering it directly over the glowing blue fleet-wide tactical retreat activation button in the center of the command console. The orange-red glow of the secondary explosion slowly faded from the Hand of Order's holographic command screen. Zarl's longest right limb still hovered over the glowing blue retreat button, his exoskeleton joints clicking with a sickening pop from extreme tension. All ground nodes have lost contact. 50 drop pod signals wiped out. Scout hover mechs, tactical gunships, and the drop tower are permanently offline. The tech officer's shrill voice shook uncontrollably. The quantum tactical lockdown net is fully deployed, but there are 0 digital signals to sever. All 36 target vehicles are chip-less, purely mechanical structures. The EMP strike was completely ineffective. They have finished rallying and are arranged in a linear formation along the I-10 highway, holding it idle. Zeryl's compound eyes remained deadlocked on those 36 blurry heat markers on the screen. 10,000 years of interstellar peacekeeping history were written with clear rules. EMP paralyzes the grid, severs the quantum command network, and the attacked civilization inevitably surrenders. But these primitive carbon-based life forms entirely bypassed the rules. They didn't use digital networks. They didn't rely on energy weapons. They used diesel-burning steel boxes and tore right through the Legion's energy shields and an entire ground force with sheer, raw, macroscopic kinetic energy. His longest right limb violently twitched and slammed down hard on the blue retreat button. Blaring warp alarms rang through the command bridge, and a pale blue warp energy mist instantly flooded the entire deck. Maximum priority warp retreat. We are never approaching this planet again. Zeryl's voice trembled beyond recognition. The first faint light of dawn crept over the Texas desert horizon. The salty hot wind, carrying the stench of diesel and gunpowder, swept across I-10. Earl leaned against the shattered doorframe of the diner, wiped the ash off his cast-iron wrench, and muttered a curse. Big Daddy leaned against the door of his Peterbilt, lighting up a fresh cigarette, and looked up at the sky. That ball of blue light hovering in low Earth orbit violently flashed, then vanished without a trace. The CB radio was buzzing with the roaring laughter of truckers. Big Daddy blew out a smoke ring and rasped into the mic. "All right, boys. Road's clear. Whoever needs to roll, roll out." These alien bastards packed it up. "Next time y'all come through, Earl's buying the steak." The morning sun crested the zenith, painting the chrome bull bars of 36 heavy rigs in a blazing gold and red. The low, rumbling roar of diesel engines drifted far down the dead straight highway, melting seamlessly into the endless desert.
Hey everyone! Finishing this story feels a lot like jumping out of the cab of a speeding big rig. My ears are still ringing, and I've still got the phantom smell of diesel, burnt rubber, and cheap cigar smoke lingering in my head. The whole idea for this story was born out of a delightfully absurd what-if scenario. What if a hyper-advanced alien armada, armed with quantum networks and a god complex, went toe-to-toe with the most stubborn, unhackable force on planet Earth? Pissed off Texas truckers? In traditional sci-fi, humanity usually tries to beat alien invaders by out-teching them. But I thought, to hell with plasma rifles and energy shields. When faced with 80,000 pounds of purely mechanical steel barreling down a highway at 80 miles an hour, all that fancy tech is just wet tissue paper. Characters like Big Daddy and Earl represent the gritty, untamed, and relentlessly stubborn side of humanity. They don't rely on algorithms or cloud data. They trust a 30-pound cast-iron wrench and a heavy boot on a gas pedal. In an era where even our refrigerators need a Wi-Fi connection, I wanted to use this darkly comedic HFY story as a love letter to the era of pure mechanics and unapologetic blue-collar grit. The aliens' humiliating defeat proves a point. Sometimes, an over-reliance on high technology is exactly what makes you fragile. Humanity's greatest weapon isn't a quantum computer. It's our sheer, stubborn audacity. It's that raw instinct to finish our cigarette, grab the nearest heavy object, and face down the apocalypse simply because it happens to be blocking our driveway. I hope you all enjoyed this grease-stained, high-octane serving of sci-fi absurdity. Until the next ride, keep the engines running and stay safe out there.